I built an epic castle in Valheim's Ashlands. Hey everyone, my name is Smitty, and today I'm bringing an awesome Valheim build your way. In this video, I'll be hopping into the newly added Ashlands biome and testing out the new materials on an epic castle build. If you enjoy this build or would just like to support the channel, the world download will be available on the Smitty Survival Patreon, and as always, a huge thank you to the patrons who continue to support. Hope you all enjoy, and without further ado, grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's get right into it. After a long hiatus away from Valheim, it was finally time to step into the Ashlands. I thought for this first project in the Ashlands we would just keep things simple. The new Grossen pieces screamed to be made into a castle, and given the Ashlands is a biome of fire, I thought it made sense for my first project to be some kind of stronghold or fortress made of stone. The goals for this project were to create a medium-sized castle, largely made of stone or Grossen, and I was thinking this would be a military outpost meant to protect and secure the region for resource collection. First up in this project was establishing a design for the shield generator. I didn't want to leave it sitting out, plain and exposed, so I thought I'd just frame it with some of the Grossen pillars to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing and integrate it into the build. Since generators are basically a prerequisite of building in the Ashlands, I think there could be some fun spin-off challenges around designing generator huts or just different ways to decorate and frame them. Once I had my first generator done, I decided I'd start working on the gate design. I used a combination of the Grossen walls, pillars, and beams to create an arched opening, and then snuck in some of the iron walls to look like a portcullis. I then thought it'd make sense that the gate was bordered by some towers to guard the approach, so I started experimenting with tower designs. The more time I spend with these Grossen pieces, the more I realize how great of an addition they were to the game. It's a little bit tricky at first getting used to the different snapping points because they added so many, but once you get a feel for them, you really realize how much more variety they provide and flexibility they give with stone structures. The intricate detailing you can pull off with these pieces is really nice, and I know there's a lot of potential to blend these with other pieces in the future. This first section with a gate and towers served as a nice bite-sized sample for me to experiment with, but this would now serve as a blueprint for patterns to repeat for the rest of my build. Moving on from here, I decided my next task was to create an outer wall that would encircle a large enough area for me to place a castle in the middle. I started by expanding out the shield zones with initial generators, and then worked to establish a wall pattern that I could reliably repeat alongside my tower and gate designs. One thing that I noticed about the Ashlands is that it's quite a bit more demanding on my PC than the other biomes, so I knew that instance management would be important here. When it comes to walls, if you're not careful, they can actually become some of the most instance-heavy parts of your project, particularly if you're covering a large area. So in this case, I just had to make sure that my patterns didn't go overboard. Just enough detailing to add some depth and make it pop a little bit more. My goal was to continue this pattern of walls, towers, and gates in an octagon so there'd be a nice symmetry to the spacing. I continued expanding in equal increments, making slight adjustments as needed as the terrain height changed, but was happy with the pattern that was emerging. There was, however, one space in the wall that was exposed to some lava, so instead of building over it, I decided I would integrate this as a nice element of story into the project. This area could be a breach in the wall where a fissure may be opened up and crumbled a section of the wall that they had to defend. I tried my best to scramble up some pieces to look destroyed, and then also use some of the damaged versions of the Grossen pieces because I found that they had a really beautiful cracked texture to it. I'm able to easily do this through my Infinity Hammer mod, but this can also be achieved by manually damaging the build pieces that you want. It just takes a little bit longer. I really like the damaged look of the breach, so I decided that I wanted to carry a similar theme to my final corner of my outer wall. The section of the fortress faced the interior of the Ashlands, so I thought it made sense that this gate would have been likely subject to more attacks, and I wanted that reflected in the build. I started with portions of my standard patterns I'd previously established, and then slowly started working in some more broken textures and randomness to my piece placement to give a more broken down look. I thought the final result looked quite cool and organic, and it definitely distinguished this section of the build from the rest. Now that my outer walls were established, my next objective was to work on the castle keep. I decided that my first task was going to be to elevate the terrain in the middle so that I could build it on a hill. I just thought that this might help distinguish the structure a little bit more as a focal point of the project. I then started to build out the outline of my keep. I thought it'd be nice to have symmetry with my keep and my outer walls, so I tried to mirror the octagonal shape and then outline the tower placements on each of the 8 corners. I then wanted to make sure that I knew where my entrance was going to be, so I spent some time building out a small gate and stairway tracking up the hill. For the braziers on each side, I wanted to use the blue flames, and then also clipped in the frost snares on item stands within each brazier to add a nice frosty visual effect. My thought here is that since the Ashlands were so hot, maybe these were enchanted braziers meant to keep you cool. I think small things like this are a really fun part of building. Just being able to create your own story and lore behind a project can transport you just for a moment into that world. From here, I just added some final details to the entrance and was happy with the result. Next, I was trying to build up some walls and towers. Similar to before, since I had a lot of symmetry in the structure, this was all about finding an aesthetically pleasing pattern that I could repeat on different faces of the structure. I find that the Grosson walls, while really nice, have a very smooth look and texture to it, which can look a little flat if left alone for large portions. So it's important to add things that create relief like trim, arches, or crossing beams to break up the larger sections of the face. From here, I just took some time to build up the rest of my towers, and I was really happy with how it was progressing. Next, I want to continue to build up my castle with a large tower in the middle. My vision was to have 3 tiers of the structure, so I went forward to creating the middle tier of the structure using arches to frame some windows and doors before ultimately building out the highest central tower. With that, the structural aspect of my castle was complete. I really liked the 3-tiered layout, and the 360 degrees of visibility made it feel like a strong defensive position. Moving on to the inside of the castle, my vision for the structure was to have it be more of a garrison, where troops were stationed versus a place where a lord lived. The trickiest part of all of it was figuring out how to build a stairway spiraling up the middle, and I elected to build a custom staircase with the wood beams. Although using the beams takes a lot longer, it gave me a lot more flexibility with spacing and shape, and just worked a little bit better in this situation. Moving to the back, I used the space under the stairs for storage, and eventually carved out some rooms on the corners where the base of the towers were. I then moved on creating a little cantina area where the soldiers could make some food, and then set some dining areas near some more blue cooling fires that I liked. These areas weren't super fancy, but still served as a nice space where the soldiers could escape the harsh Ashland environment. Next, I just wanted to make a small forge in one of the corners. I thought that maybe this was a specialized area where rare weapons were being honed using the resources gathered from the region. From there, I also decided to use one of the corner rooms as a small armory. Again, nothing much, but small workspaces tend to have their charm. On the other side, I would just place a cartography table and some other lounging spaces around cold fires to fill out the remaining spaces. Moving upstairs, I needed to finish off some of the flooring for the spiral staircase headed up the different tiers of the tower. Again, this was probably the trickiest part, but when it was all said and done, it actually worked quite well going up to the tallest point. On the outside, I would just make some last decorative additions to make it look like this castle was actively being defended. Just the things like weapon mounts, rock piles, and arrow wells scattered along the walls to boost the defenses. With that, my castle structure was complete. I definitely liked the garrison feel of it, and although the single tower was a pain to connect with stairs, it did give the build a much larger presence and composition, which I liked. I decided that for the final space of the castle, I would just fill the scene as best I could with things that made the area look inhabited. Things like resource carts and different campsites with cooling fires. I had to make a bit of a strategic decision at this point because, as I mentioned, it seemed that my PC seemed to struggle a bit more from an FPS perspective in the Ashlands. I assume it has something to do with the lighting and particle effects of this region, but at any rate, I was seeing some pretty big drops in performance. So this made me more inclined to go a little bit lighter with the final touch-ups and decorations. When it was all said and done, I think filling out these final spaces, even if only lightly, really helped pull together the scene of this project. Now all that was left to do was clean it up a bit, add a couple more details, cue the cinematic.